So good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining me. So the title of this presentation is Designing Training for Transfer. So this is from practice to performance in youth soccer. So put simply, it's about making sure what players learn in training shows up when it matters most during the game. Here's the challenge. Coaches at every level spend hours planning sessions and teaching skills, yet many still see players struggle to translate practice into match performance. The reason lies in transfer of learning, the ability to take what's practice and apply it in game conditions. Transfer doesn't happen automatically. It depends on how training is designed, the environment, the nature of the task, the level of engagement, and even the social and emotional context. Too often, traditional drills isolate technique from context, creating players who look sharp in practice but can't solve problems in matches. So my aim today is to try and close that gap. We'll explore evidence-based approaches, ecological dynamics, constraints-led coaching, and representative learning design, all designed to build sessions reflecting the demands of the game. I'll also share findings from my own research showing how design principles can enhance transfer. But this is not about one-size-fits-all solutions, but adaptable principles that strategize to help you design environments that develop creative, adaptable, and game-ready players. Okay, so before we dive into this presentation, I want to give you a bit of insight on how I try to approach my coaching and my education. I think after about 25 years of coaching now, you kind of might expect me to sit on this presentation and give you a lot of answers to follow. The truth is, I don't know how to do this. I don't know what works. And I know that might sound a bit silly, but I don't think anyone does. Coaching isn't about discovering a magic formula. It's about facing uncertainty every day. How people learn, what motivates them, how emotions influence performance, and how constantly changing game always surprises us. Early on, I thought coaching meant transferring skills. Over time, I've learned it's about navigating people, their personalities, their fears, their ambitions, and you have to add this to a chaotic game of soccer. No two players or sessions are ever the same. That's frustrating, but it's also what makes coaching meaningful. I've added a quote here by Richard Feynman, and he said, "I'd rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned." And coaching thrives on curiosity, reflection, and adaptation. What works today might fail tomorrow, and that's okay. My goal is to not give prescriptions, but ideas for you to adapt and use at your own will. So really embrace uncertainty, stay curious, and keep learning. Okay, so before we dive deeper, let me give you a quick roadmap on where we're heading in this session. And this is what we're going to look to cover. So first of all, why do we coach? Understanding the purpose behind the role. True development versus trends. What actually matters in player development versus what looks good on social media. Common coaching problems. Habits that limit transfer like over-instruction or static drills. Specificity and transfer principles. Why training must mirror the game. Transfer study, some research insights to some key findings I conducted when I was researching real-life coaching environments. What coaches can do, so some concrete strategies to apply tomorrow. The constraints-led coaching in games, how to use constraints in game design to develop adaptable players. So the flow is intentional. We start with the why, our purpose. Then identify the problems, explore the evidence, and finish with some practical solutions. And in this way, we can connect some theory with some application, because ideas are only really useful if they change what happens on the field. So why do we coach? And this question matters more than any drills or tactics because it's what shapes our decisions every day. At its core, coaching is not just about producing players who can execute techniques. It's about guiding human development. There's a lot of research out there that tells us that quality coaching fosters three fundamental needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. When these needs are met, players are motivated, resilient, and engaged, not just in soccer but in life. So, yes, we coach to develop better players, but that's not the whole story. We also coach to bring joy and connection, to help kids fall in love with the game. We coach to build character and confidence, giving them the tools to navigate challenges on and off the field. We coach to foster community, creating a space where players feel they belong. Um, and then we coach to prepare players for real life games, not artificial drills. So here's the key point: if training doesn't transfer to performance, we're missing the mark. A player might look sharp in passing patterns, but if they freeze under pressure in a match, something is wrong. Transfer, taking what's learned in practice and applying it in the competition, should be our ultimate measure of success. To make that happen, we must move beyond busy sessions and towards environments that challenge players to think, adapt, and make decisions under realistic conditions. This is the essence of meaningful coaching. Every activity should serve a purpose, preparing players for the unpredictable, dynamic reality of the game. So as we move through this presentation, keep that lens in mind. Does this approach help players perform in the game? If yes, it's worth doing. If not, we need to rethink it. So, one of the biggest challenges in modern coaching is the tension between what looks good and what develops players. Um, Social media overflows with polished drills, cone slaloms, passing patterns, flashy tutorials that look structured and professional but often fail to prepare players for the game. The problem is context. Isolated drills may sharpen technique in the short term, but they strip away the very elements that define soccer. Things like pressure, opponent, space, time, unpredictability. Players end up memorizing choreography, not solving problems. And that's why someone can dominate a pattern drill but struggle once a defender applies pressure. There's a lot of research on skill acquisition and ecological dynamics that shows that learning is context dependent. Development comes from representative design, training that mirrors the demands of the real games, with cues, decisions, and emotional stress built in. True progress looks messy: small-sided games, variable conditions, and mistakes that fuel adaptation. Don't coach for optics, coach for outcomes. When we talk about developing young players, it's tempting to focus on speed, tactics, and formations. Coaches often want to prepare children for the real game, but in doing so, they sometimes overlook the most important ingredient, and that is passion. Think of a young child stepping onto the field. What excites them isn't learning tactical systems. It's chasing the ball, it's laughing with teammates, and discovering what they can do. Early development should be about fun, freedom, and creativity. Yet, too often, the whistle blows, the coach talks, and the game pauses for more instructions. Press higher, shift shape, cover space. Soccer becomes serious, structured, and heavy. The joy fades. The danger here is simple. Without passion, players lose the motivation to continue. And again, there's research that shows that intrinsic motivation, enjoyment, challenge, and curiosity is what drives long-term development. When soccer feels like pressure rather than play, children are disengaged. But when they love the game, then they naturally practice more, take risks, and persist through setbacks. This is why passion must come first. Skill, tactics, and physical qualities grow best in environments where children want to play. Small-sided games, fun challenges, and opportunities for free expression allow players to learn while staying engaged. Our role as coaches is not to overload with information, but to guide and encourage, protecting the joy of let the game be the teacher. If players fall in love with soccer, the rest follows. Technique improves, tactical awareness develops, the resilience grows. But if we miss that step, we risk losing not just future talent, but the very essence of why the game matters. Um, Before precision comes passion. Before formations is freedom. Before systems is smiles. And looking at the slide I've shared here, I've highlighted that the third picture that is in color seems to be the dominant aspect of player development, and we miss out that pure joy and play and want to push development too quickly. So another challenge that we face in youth coaching is over instruction. Coaches talking too much, and as you can see in the image on the left, players are bombarded with constant commands. Pass now, don't dribble, stay in line. The intention is good. We want to help as coaches, but too much talking creates problems. And first, it overwhelms players. Soccer is a fast pace requiring constant scanning and quick decisions. If a coach adds non-stop commentary, the player's attention shifts from the game to processing instructions. This overload not only slows decisions, but also limits learning. Second, it reduces autonomy. When coaches dictate every action, players become reliant on guidance rather than solving problems themselves. Over time, this will stifle creativity, adaptability, and confidence, the very qualities we want to nurture. Third, as the slide highlights, it eats into playing time. The more we talk, the less kids play. Yet we know the best development happens through active engagement, exploration, and discovery. Now look at the right side of the image. Your game, your rules. Here is the coach that steps back and the environment takes the lead. Instead of endless instructions, players are immersed in fun, small-sided activities that keep them moving, laughing, and experimenting. Engagement, smiles, and joy signal that true learning is happening. This is really the essence of an environmental coaching approach. Rather than relying on our words, we design the environments to teach, adjusting the field sizes, creating game rules, or setting challenges that shape behavior naturally. Our role becomes guiding and observing, not dictating every step. So in short, I would say talk less and design more. When children are given the freedom to play, explore, and enjoy, they not only learn faster but also fall in love with the game, ensuring passion drives their long-term development. So in this slide, it's really about starting with the game itself. Too often, coaches design drills in isolation, running laps, passing in straight lines, or repeating unopposed patterns. But here's the question we must always ask. Does this look like the game? Because if training doesn't reflect demands of soccer, how can we expect transfer to happen? So think about watching a match, whether this is live or on TV. Everything you need for your training session is there in front of you. Constant scanning, rapid decisions, players moving into new spaces, communication under pressure, passes and shots executed in unpredictable, chaotic moments. That's soccer, and that's what we need to design for. So as shown in the graphic, a game is a cycle of scanning, deciding, moving, passing or shooting, and communicating. These actions are not in isolation. They're interconnected and constantly adapting to the environment. A pass, for example, is not just a technical skill. It's a decision made based on where teammates, opponents, and space are in that moment. This is perception-action coupling. Players perceive information and act on it in real time. Traditional drills often strip away this context. They may produce tidy repetitions, but they don't prepare players for the chaos of the game. Without defenders, pressure, or consequences, the perceptual and emotional demands are missing. And research has shown that learning transfers best when practice preserves the information and psychological conditions of competition. And really, let's not forget about communication. Soccer is not an individual sport. Success comes from collaboration, pressing, covering, combining. Training should encourage interaction, not on isolation. So players develop collective understanding as well as individual skill. So really the takeaway from this is if we want performance in games, training must look and feel like the game. Build from the realities, decisions, moments, communication, and pressure. Because if practice doesn't replicate the demands of soccer, performance won't transfer when it matters most. Let me just start these videos. So, on this slide, you'll notice two very different visuals. At the top, an ordinary highway system. Cars flowing neatly in straight lines. It's predictable, controlled, and efficient. At the bottom is a chaotic traffic scene. There's cars, there's bikes, there's buses, and people all moving in different directions, negotiating space dynamically and constantly adapting. These videos represent two very different ideas for coaching. Too often, we coach like the highway. Structured drills, players in lines, rehearsed patterns, everything looks organized. It looks professional, safe, and efficient to those parents still on the sideline, but here's the problem. Soccer doesn't look like that. The game looks more like the chaotic traffic scene. It's messy, unpredictable, and full of constant interactions. Space opens and closes. Teammates and opponents change the picture every second. Decisions must be made under pressure with incomplete information. That's the reality players face in matches, and it rarely resembles the clean, linear order of many training drills that I see in coaching. So here's the disconnect. We coach in highways but expect performance to be chaos. We drill patterns that give an illusion of competence, but when the game gets messy, players freeze because they've never practiced in that type of environment. There's a lot of research in skill acquisition that's quite clear. Players develop adaptability by experiencing variability. They need the noise of the game, pressure, constraints, and uncertainty to learn how to cope. So really the takeaway is messy learning can be good learning. Instead of dictating everything, we should try to create small-sided games, game-like activities that reflect soccer's chaos. Because if we train in a session that looks like the highway, we can't expect players to thrive in conditions like the traffic you see in the bottom video. So here's a bit of an activity, and it's really something I put together on a kind of a specificity test. And what I'm going to do is I like to ask people where you would rank different activities in terms of how close they are to the game itself. Most people guess differently, and that's the point. It makes us think critically about what we do on the training field. So really, if we're looking at one side of making it game-like as possible, our training, and on the other side, we're making it really far away from the game itself, where would you categorize these? Things like 3v3 game, 1v1 game, 4v4 game, 2v2 game, track running. So really, it's good to have a think about this as a coach, but because it can shape your training sessions. But here is really an order of what I would say is, if we're looking at the game itself, 8, as close as possible, is 4v4. Then we would go another game, because it's game-like, and we'll look at probably 3v3. And then we'll go on and on. 6, I would probably say, is the 2v2. And then we keep coming away from the game itself. So 5 would be the 1v1 game. And then we probably shift down a bit. So now we're looking at these isolated conditions. So we're probably looking at dribbling in and out of cones. Could be 4. 3, dribbling in straight lines. 2 could be passing back and forth while stood still. And then 1 is likely to be track running. So why did I put them in this order? Because if there's one principle that underpins everything we've discussed, it's specificity. For learning to transfer, training must reflect the demands of the game. And specificity isn't just about a ball being present or goals on the pitch. True specificity includes cognitive, perceptual, emotional, and social elements, decision making under pressure, scanning for cues, coordinating with teammates, adapting to opponents, and even managing emotions. And again, research has suggested that transfer is most likely when practice shares these key similarities with the performance environments. Low variability activities like cone dribbling or passing in straight line and pairs may look neat but rarely transfer. High variability activities like small-sided games force players to solve problems, adapt and collaborate, just as they will have to in games. So when we design sessions, the question isn't, is this tidy? But does this look and feel like the game? The closer the resemblance, the higher the transfer. The takeaway, train for the game, not around it. Use representative design and constraints to shape learning. Because if players spend all their time running tracks or dribbling through cones, we can't expect them to excel when the game gets chaotic. So recently, I conducted a study on the transfer in youth soccer coaching. And really the central question behind this was quite simple. How do different training designs influence transfer to match performance? And in doing this, I worked with youth players aged 9 to 17. And this really for me is a critical window for skill and really cognitive development. The players were split into two groups. And really group A was the contextual training. These players trained through small-sided games with rule constraints, representative task design, and tactical triggers. In other words, their training looked and felt like the game. Then I had Group B. This is more a traditional training group. These players worked with drill-based technique-heavy methods, cone dribbling, isolated passing, and limited opposition. Both groups trained over the same time frame with standardized session plans that aligned coaching cues to keep things fair. So really to evaluate transfer, we used kind of a mixed method design. This meant looking not only at what changed on the field, but also at how players experienced the learning process. On the quantitative track, we kind of measured skill checklist scores, gathered coach evaluations, and ran intergroup comparisons using effect sizes and ANOVA. On the qualitative track, we used things like think aloud interviews and photo voice reflections, where players use images to express their learning. These were analyzed thematically to capture kind of cognitive emotional insights. This combination gave us kind of a fuller picture. It not just if transfer happened, but how it unfolded. The ultimate aim was to bridge the gap between research and real coaching practice, providing insights that could actually be applied in grassroots and academy environments. So the key question driving the study was this: would representative game-based training show stronger transfer than traditional drills? And I'm going to share some of the findings on the next slide. So here's some of my findings from the study. And to be honest, they do really reinforce the themes that we've been building onto this stage. So first, look at the bar on the right-hand side. This is the contextual group that scored 7.9 on the average of transfer, compared to 5.4 for the standard group. That's a significant difference. So in short, training that looked like the game transferred much more effectively to the game. Now the diagram in the middle here explains why. Motivation acted as the key mediator. Training type on its own didn't directly drive transfer. What mattered was how that transfer impacted motivation. When players felt autonomy, challenge, and relatedness, their motivation increased. And that's what fueled higher transfer. In other words, motivation was the bridge between training design and learning outcomes. And really on the left here, I just done a summary of this study, and it just reflects on that motivation mediated learning, Without motivation, transfer weakened. Cognitive load helped. Tasks that challenged players, not simplified them, produced stronger learning. Representativeness mattered. Contextual activities aligned with real match demands produce better decision making and adaptability. Player led sessions work best. Giving players choices and agency strengthened confidence and ownership. Emotional connection mattered. Enjoyment, social bonds, and feeling invested made players more likely to apply learning. Autonomy improved engagement. Players stayed locked in when they felt trusted to solve problems. So, really, the takeaway is this: transfer isn't purely technical, it's psychological and it's relational too. If you want practice to transfer, we must design environments that engage players as thinkers, problem solvers, and teammates, not just executors of drills. So, really, I've just pulled together 4 lenses we can use to design, I suppose, smarter training sessions. This is information processing, cognitive load, variability, and motivation. Each lens helps us to see the game and learning through a different perspective. At the center is the athlete because everything starts with their context and needs. Information processing on the top right. Soccer is a perception action game. Players scan, interpret cues, and act quickly. If we overload them with too many verbal instructions, we interrupt that natural process. Instead, give clear, consistent triggers like when the opponent turns his back, press. That links perception, seeing the turn, to action pressing without clutter. Cognitive load, the bottom right. Players' brains have limits. If we stack multiple new tasks at once, new information, technical drills, tactical cue, we risk overload. That slows decision making and creates errors. Instead, you can layer complexity gradually. Establish one element, then add another once it's stable. The slide reminds us really here to distinguish between intrinsic load, task difficulty, and extrinsic load, poorly delivered instructions. And the germane load is really focused learning, relevant effort. So, variability on the top left, the game is unpredictable, but practice often isn't. Too much repetition in the same format doesn't prepare players for chaos. By adding variability, changing space, altering numbers, adjusting rules, we align really with the Bernstein's repetition without repetition effect. The skill repeats, but always in a slightly, I suppose, different way, building adaptability. And motivation on the bottom left, this is the engine. Motivation drives effort, persistence, and attention. Training that fosters autonomy, competence, and relatedness engages players more deeply. That means offering choices, ensuring success is possible, and then building strong connections. Fun, joy, and ownership aren't extras, they're catalysts for transfer. So when we design sessions through these 4 lenses, we move beyond running drills on the field. We now create environments where learning is rich, adaptable, and game ready. So I'm sure you're getting the gist now as coaches, and hopefully I'm supporting some of your thoughts, or maybe contradicting some of your ideas. But I've just really made a simple checklist for coaches to think about when designing training. It's not about adding more complexity, it's about aligning sessions with how players actually learn and what the game really demands. So really, just to go through these quickly, focus on context-rich tasks. Choose activities that replicate match conditions. The closer training looks and feels to the game, the greater the chance of transfer. Emphasize perception action links. Encourage players to scan, interpret cues, and respond. For example, teach pressing not through lectures, but by designing scenarios where players recognize triggers like an opponent turning their back. Reduce overcoaching. Limit constant instructions. Instead, give players space to explore, make mistakes, and solve problems themselves. Autonomy builds confidence. Let players struggle productively. Struggle isn't failure, it's learning. Challenges and mistakes are essential for growth. Create productive challenges. Keep players on the edge of their abilities. Too easy and they are disengaged. Too hard and they shut down. The sweet spot is where growth happens. Scaffold decision making. Guide players early but progressively step back. And the goal is independence, not reliance on the coach. So hopefully this checklist helps ensure where we're not just running drills but creating environments where players learn, adapt and thrive. So hope this helps. Before we move into some of the constraints theory and some practical ways to design training, I wanted to just pause very slightly and bring up the non-linear pedagogy. I think this is an important foundation for how we think about coaching and learning. So on one side, you can see the contrast. On the left is a linear curriculum. Week 1 is dribbling, week 2 is passing, week 3 is shooting. It looks neat and organized, but it assumes learning is predictable and sequential. The problem is soccer isn't linear. The game is chaotic, dynamic, and ever-changing. Players don't face week 1 dribbling in isolation. They face moments that demand dribbling, passing, and shooting all at once and under pressure. So on the right, we have the non-linear learning. Here, players adapt, explore, make mistakes, and discover solutions through the game itself. They're exposed to representative, variable, and meaningful tasks that reflect the real complexities of soccer. The emphasis is on representative learning design, constraints-led coaching, and player-led discovery. Non-linear pedagogy accepts that development isn't tidy, it's messy, but that mess is where creativity, problem-solving, and adaptability are born. When we design through this type of lens, we create environments where players don't just repeat skills, they learn to apply them in context. This is really the foundation we'll build on when we look at the constraints practice and some of the practical games that we'll share. So on this slide kind of introduces one of the most, I suppose, powerful frameworks we can use in modern coaching, and that's the constraints-led approach. So back in 1986, Newell proposed the theory of constraints, which showed that skill and behavior emerge from the interactions of 3 types of constraints: individual, task, and environmental. On the right side, you can see the model represented as a kind of triangle. At one corner are individual constraints, the things unique to each player, such as age, height, speed, technical ability, confidence, or even fatigue on a given day. At another corner are task constraints, the rules, the goals, the equipment, and structure of the activity. And finally, we have environmental constraints, the physical and social context, like the size of the field, the surface, weather, or even crowd and peer influences. As coaches, we can't control every individual constraint, but we have a tremendous influence over the task and environmental side of the model. And that's where the magic happens. By adjusting these elements, we can shape behavior without relying on constant verbal instructions. So, for example, when players, if you want players to attack wide, add scoring zones on the wing. Want quick combinations, limit touches or shrink the space. Want compact defending, make central goals worth double. So what happens when we do this? There's kind of 3 powerful things that happen. Learning becomes implicit. Players adapt naturally for experiences. We encourage problem solving. Athletes figure out solutions under pressure. And we foster creativity because there isn't one right answer. Players discover new ways of succeeding. So instead of being the voice that controls every action, the coach becomes the designer of the environments. We don't just tell players what to do, we create conditions where the game itself teaches them. This approach respects soccer complexity and prepares players to thrive in it. So I just wanted to share a real world example that really highlights the power of constraints. And this is the Manchester United 4v4 pilot scheme that was researched by Rick Fenolio in 2013. In the early 2000s, Man United Football Club recognised the problem. Their under 9 players were falling behind their European counterparts, not because of talent, but because of the environment. In England, the mandated 8v8 format met too few touches, too much space and too little decision making. Players weren't being stretched. Meanwhile, European kids were playing smaller formats, street games and free play, which nurture creativity and adaptability. So Manchester United Football Club petitioned the Premier League to trial a 4v4 format for U9s. The shift was quite dramatic. In the 4v4, players touched the ball constantly, engaged in 1v1s and were forced to make decisions every few seconds. Hiding wasn't possible. Everyone was involved. The scheme tested 4 different game types. Game A was line ball. This was no goals and it was encouraging dribbling and creativity. Game B, narrow goals, rewarding accuracy and precision of finishing. Game C, 2 goals per side, forcing scanning, awareness and switching play. And Game D, large goals with goalkeepers, boosting shooting confidence and attacking intent. What's striking is that none of this relied on heavy instruction. The constraints themselves shaped the behaviours. Players learned to dribble because scoring required it. They learned to scan because options were multiplied. They became creative and adaptable because the environment demanded it. The lesson is quite simple from this. Sometimes the smartest coaching move isn't telling players what to do. It's designing games where the game itself teaches them. So over the next few slides, I'm going to share some of my most enjoyable games that I think the children have a lot of fun with, and it does rely on less instruction. So this game here is called Cone Tower. The constraint-based game designed really by myself and a good friend of mine called Gareth Long. So at first glance, it looks like a simple 2v2 setup in 3 fields. But the twist comes after each goal. So behind every mini goal is a tower of cones. When a player scores, they must immediately leave the pitch, run behind the goal and place a disc cone onto the tower before rejoining the game. That short moment of absence creates a natural overload for the opposition. Suddenly, one team has an extra player and must decide to attack quickly to exploit the numbers, or hold possession and wait for balance to return. The scoring team, meanwhile, has to defend short-handed, learning how to delay and protect. So I'll just play the game so you can see it in action. So this is really a clever constraint that teaches transition management, decision-making and communication under pressure, while keeping the game competitive and fun at the same time. The race to complete your cone tower adds energy and urgency, making it a really good and fun, enjoyable game for players. This next game, that's probably one of my favourite games for managing my sessions, is a game called Tic-Tac-Toe, or it could be Noughts and Crosses if you're based in the UK. But it's a clever game that blends the technical skill with tactical strategy. 2 teams play a normal small-sided game, but the twist is the tic-tac-toe grid shown on the board, which the board is here. So each square represents a different scoring challenge. Like one square could be finishing with the weaker foot, one square could be scoring after 3 passes, or first time shot. You can write these in each square. When a team completes one of these actions, they'll get to claim that square as either X or O. So one team would be X, the other team would be O, just like the classic game. The aim is to complete 3 in a row, obviously horizontally, vertically, or diagonally. After each goal, or everyone's done a task, the team huddles very quickly and they look to choose the task collectively as a team and go back to the field and try and do it. So suddenly soccer becomes both a physical and mental context with a lot of collaboration and team building. This design forces players to balance short-term execution with some long-term planning. It promotes creative finishing, collaboration, tactical adaptability, and it also makes the environment very competitive, engaging, and fun. So I'll just play the video here so you can see that teams have chosen a task. This potentially could be score on a first-time volley, and that results to them having a circle in the square. Now, obviously, when they go back, the team has to tactically choose how they're either going to make their 3 in a row or potentially block the blue circle. Very enjoyable game, and again, this tic-tac-toe concept can be used for any particular topic that you might be working on. This could be all to do with shooting, score in the top corner, score in the bottom corner, score with first touch, score with a cross. You could use this however how you want to, and it's really, really good fun for the kids. This game is a favourite of mine as well. It's called Cone Bonus, and it's a brilliant way to inject unpredictability and strategy into your small-sided games. So as a coach, if you've ever kind of seen my cones or dived into my coaching bag, you'll notice that most of my cones all have sticky tabs underneath with a task written on the sticky tab. And this could be tasks like scoring from a cross, taking a player on individually, defending, being compact, etc. Loads of different tasks that you might think about and how to help development for young players. But this game, Cone Bonus, is quite interesting because what I'll do is I'll put a group of cones down the side of the field. Each one has a task underneath. And what happens is that on the first goal that's scored, the team that didn't score gets to go and choose a cone, which is going to give them a bonus. And this type of game allows the players to collaborate and collectively come together and read about the task they've chosen. And what happens is that they go back to the field, and this type of game allows it to be a bonus for the team that's just been down one goal, giving them a certain advantage. So the example in this game, which I'll play now, is you can see that the blue team has scored. So the game stops. The red team has gone across to the field, chose a cone, and this particular task is still the opponent's goalkeeper. So for this next phase of the small-sided game, the red team have 2 goalkeepers and the other team don't have a goalkeeper at all. Obviously, as you can see here, that the cone, once chosen, is gone behind the goal, so you don't choose it again. But a great game to allow players to really kind of take ownership, take responsibility for their own kind of decisions they're making technically and tactically. So with a lot of my sessions, I do like to mix it up a bit and use different equipment, apparatus, different styles of teaching. And I really enjoy using scenario cards. And this is really a tool designed to simulate kind of real match challenges and get players thinking tactically. So really, each of these cards present a situation the team must respond to. For example, a task could be you're down 1-0 with 5 minutes left. Press high. Or play the next 5 minutes with a player down. So when they get these tasks, the setup is quite simple. You hand each team a card, give them a moment to plan their response, and then let them play it out. After a goal or a set time, allow a short timeout where teams can reflect, adapt, or even switch strategies. Players can also design their own scenarios, drawing from experience in their own matches, for examples from professional games they might have seen on TV. But again, what makes this powerful is that the constraint is situational rather than physical. Players are learning to read context, make tactical choices, and lead discussions. It develops decision-making, communication, and leadership, and without the coach needing to direct every move. So these scenario cards are excellent. Give the players of each team a card, let them reflect. As you can see in the bottom left, they can discuss, communicate, collaborate, and they return to the field making their own decisions on how to solve this problem. So this is another kind of things I like to use in my training as well. And this really brings the cultural and historical values to young players. And we all know that there's a huge drive to become their idols in the game. You know, a lot of kids worship their players. They watch them on TV and they want to model them on that particular player. So getting children, certainly in the US where I'm based, is very important, because really the connection to the history of the game is not well established here in America. But what I like to use is these things called player tasks, and simple but really kind of powerful way to connect players to the kind of culture of the game. So each card features an iconic player, could be past or present, along with a signature behavior linked to their style. For example, Neymar's creativity in 1v1s, and Messi's ability to take players on 1v1 and dribble and score goals, or Harry Kane's finishing with both feet. So before a game's played, players pick a card and take on the challenge of being that player during the session. And the task becomes their personal focus, whether it's dribbling at speed like Sterling, combining overlaps like Marcelo, or leading from the back like Stones. So really, really powerful bit of education here for children. But really the reason it works is it builds the game intelligence by helping players understand roles and responsibilities. It sparks intrinsic motivation because kids love to emulate their heroes. And it nurtures creativity, encouraging them to express those skills in their own way. The coach's role is light touch again. Observe, encourage, and maybe even guess who each player has chosen, making learning fun and engaging and deeply connected to the game itself. So, very enjoyable game I like to use, but also you can move on from your training session, and if a player has selected someone like Neymar, you might introduce some homework. Can you give 3 fun facts about Neymar for next week's session? So it gets them to have deeper learning in their sessions. So just obviously giving you some practical insights and some constraints-based coaching. But I just want to kind of finalize this presentation really and give us all a clear way to reflect on the kind of environments we design for our players. So really just put together a little diagram here, and on the left you can see features of traditional drill-based design, technique isolation, players as passive receivers, decision directed by the coach, fixed patterns in predictable environments. These sessions may look neat and efficient, but they often have low match application. Players get good at rehearsing movements, but those movements don't always transfer to the chaos of the real game. On the right, we start to see transfer-orientated design. Here, the focus shifts to game execution. Players are active decision makers, solving problems as they emerge. Choices are player-led, not coach-scripted. Instead of repeating fixed patterns, players face dynamic problems, just as they would in a real game. The environment is game-like and variable, reflecting the unpredictable nature of the game of soccer. The outcome is high game relevance, learning that transfers directly into performance. So really the takeaway for coaches is quite simple. The closer our training reflects the demands of the game, the more likely players are to adapt, grow, and succeed. This doesn't mean we abandon all drills, but it does mean we should constantly ask, will this actively prepare my players for the real game? So hopefully you guys have made it this far and haven't fallen asleep. But if there's one message today that I would like to give you is the game does teach the game. Our role as coaches isn't to control every action, but to design environments where players can explore, adapt, and thrive. Think of training as like a bridge. On one side is practice, and on the other side is performance. If that bridge is built on too much isolated drills that don't resemble the game, players will struggle to cross. But if the activities mirror real demands, representative, engaging, and adaptive, players walk confidently into match play. So, to guide your planning, here are a few questions that I'd like you to reflect on. Does this activity truly reflect demands of the game? Am I keeping instructions short enough to let players learn through guided discovery and active involvement? Have I maximised ball time through small-sided games, reducing the lines, laps and lectures, and waiting to sustain engagement? Does this session challenge players to problem solve, fostering creativity, adaptability, and quick decision making? Are my players making authentic decisions or just repeating rehearsed moves? Am I balancing both joy and challenge in the environment I create? So if your answer is yes, you're not just coaching skills, you're building resilient, creative thinkers. Less telling, more designing, less talking, more playing. So I just want to say thank you for joining me on this presentation into designing training for transfer. I really do hope the ideas have challenged your thinking and providing practical strategies that you can apply straight away. But remember, coaching is not about perfection, it's about progress. Every session you design shapes more than skills. It creates experiences that players carry for life. That's both a privilege and a responsibility. But as I suggested in the beginning of this presentation, I am purely sharing ideas. I have used this method of game-based learning and constraints, and I do like to step away and allow my environment to be designed to educate players. But it doesn't always work every time. And I also have to adapt, and I have to challenge myself, and I can constantly keep learning. Maybe what I've shared with you today might not work for you, but really it's just a concept for you guys to take on and use as a tool in your toolbox and maybe reflect sometimes. But really together, let's create environments where players think, adapt, and fall in love with the game. So anyway, I appreciate your time and thank you for joining me on this presentation.